Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Well, this week I have something extremely exciting. I recently spent some time with Tom Holman. Now, if you're at all a vintage audio historian, enthusiast, you will certainly know the name Tom Holman. If you don't know his name, you certainly know some of the things he has developed. He started his career at Advent and then went on to have his own company, Apt Holman, then moved on to develop something that, if you're in the home theater arena, you know very well. It's called THX. He set the standard for THX early on, and then went on to do a lot of work with Apple. So he's had an extremely illustrious career and covered so much. And this is the first in that series, so I hope you enjoy it. Here's Tom.
Started in electrical engineering at Illinois in 1964. What I wanted to do at the time was stage lighting. I had done a lot of it in high school, a little bit of sound, but lighting was a combination of art and technology that really interested me. I was doing it through plays, all the plays in high school and so forth. I got to college and there was a professor of lighting. And so, well, I could study with him, but he was going to light the plays. I wasn't going to get to do that. So I kind of diverted over into sound because there were no sound professors, especially in those days. So I did stuff like I got access to Leger Hiller's electronic music studio, and I actually wrote some stuff for a kids' play in the summertime. You know, real simple electronic music stuff. I didn't know much what I was doing, but I did put that together. And I worked for a guy whom I didn't know at all, who turned out to have been the ex-president of MGM, of all things. So he was, by then, MGM had kind of failed under his watch, trying to make black and white gritty movies since television had come along and stolen their thunder. So he'd gone toward the dark side of movies about alcoholism and so forth and so on. So he got booted out and was on the road doing theater tours. So I got to work for him and make sound effects for plays. Who knew? What an amazing thing, you know? Dory Sherry was his name. And then what happened was I went from as a freshman through junior doing all the theater sound. I kind of moved over into film sound. There was a course taken. First of all, I dropped out of engineering. It was a time when, you have to understand, it was the middle of the Vietnam War. Everybody was sort of headed for industry. I didn't see any place there for engineering for the arts. Didn't exist. And so I moved over into the journalism school, which was a fairly lightweight curriculum, frankly, but allowed me to take a lot of things. So I continued with some engineering courses, and I put together a program, which today they kind of allow more than they did in the old days. And so I only had a few required courses. Well, one of those courses was in filmmaking, and it came from people who had been at USC Cinema. So I was getting USC Cinema lessons once removed, and I was more technical than the other students. So I got hired by the Motion Picture Production Center, which was a non-academic part of the university, to work in between in summer session to edit films, and I did a lot of jobs, schlipping and cutting negative, and I learned a lot of stuff about film. Then they had a fire, and the fire meant that they had to rebuild, and I got to do the rebuilding with external companies, of course, but I was the man on the side to do the actual assembly of this system. And so we built a film sound mixing system in the basement of an old rooming house in Urbana. And I then got the job of recording, editing, and mixing movies for some years. So I stayed 5 years after graduating and worked for the university, but I also got to read everything in audio. Now, at the time, this is now 1968 to 72 or 3, you could read everything published in audio, but there were Radiotron Designer's Handbook. Well, that was a big one. But you could read the entire Journal of the Audio Engineering Society, for instance. There's no way anybody could do that today. You'd have to read a much narrower field. But I got to read broadly. The university would buy any books I wanted, and I still support them because of this. And so that's where my education came from. It came out of the library, and working. Well, I took a vacation to see a friend in Boston. And by this point, I had started a little tiny company called Lab Sound. We made circuit boards for Bob Heil, and he took them on tour with the Grateful Dead and so forth. And but we made the boards, and we made some electronics. This is now, I've graduated, but I can build some things. And I built a little mixer to go along with my Nagra recorder. I had bought a Nagra with a bank loan and gotten enough work, advertising and so forth, to do recording in Chicago for stuff. And so had built this thing along with it. Well, then came the trip to Boston to see a friend in 72. And I went in, he was working during the week, but had long weekend off. So I went into a headhunter, and they said, oh, yeah, we'll send you to Advent. And Advent, I knew who Advent was. It was the best-selling speaker, and I knew Advent well from the early days. By the way, I bought a Revox tape recorder with my graduation money. I was into it. I knew Radio Doctors in Champaign, Illinois, the best dealer. Bose 901s. I bought some of the first. Oh no, I sold them pretty soon, but etc. But so went there, went to Advent, and they gave me a test, and it had questions like, "What is the ringing voltage of the phone system?" And I knew that. What is the transistor color code? And I knew that. And in this circuit, what happens? And I knew that. And it turned out I was the only one who did, because Advent was 2 blocks from MIT, but none of the MIT kids knew any of that stuff, because they knew Faven equations, but they had never reduced it to practice. So they didn't know the ringing voltage of a telephone. And so I did that in March at spring break. It was my spring break. And they called back in June and hired me for 50% more than I was making from the university. So I moved, and then I got the best thing that could have happened. Henry Kloss was the founder and president, and I worked for him directly in a short time. And he was very involved with making the tubes and the screens for the projection television.
Right.
But it didn't, and he kind of left the audio electronics to me, and the loudspeakers to Andy Casados, and I worked with him too. So here's this fairly large for audio company with loudspeakers and electronics, in which I was the chief engineer and pretty much had run of the place. Of course, I reported into Henry, and I showed him what I was doing and things like that, but he was very helpful and happy that I was doing what I was doing and so forth. So I got training grounds that was just unbelievably nice. And from that, I was trying to answer at the time, why do these new transistor things not sound as good as these tube things? So I studied what the tubes were doing and what the transistors were doing. And now I was kind of the first wave of transistors had been the RCA transistor manual, 2 transistors per preamp, because they were expensive and new. But I was coming along a few years later, and transistors were now pretty cheap, like 20 cents. And so you could afford more of them. And I wanted to figure out what it was that the the tubes did. Well, what I found was by injecting a voltage into the base of a cartridge and measuring through the cartridge into the vacuum tube amp and into the phonopreamps, they measured very differently. The phonopreamps, the transistorized phonopreamps, were loading down the cartridge at high frequencies because they didn't have enough open loop gain to sustain that impedance. So it was dropping and rolling off the highs. So if you did a blind A/B between the two, all the symbols were gone. It was pretty amazing. So what I did is I developed a circuit that used a field effect transistor, which is more like a tube, for the input device, which didn't interact with the cartridge. And it did a bunch of other things. It was better on my competitor, Macintosh, had problems. This was the CB radio craze time. And everybody had problems with CB. So they had scattered capacitors all over the circuit. But that all rolled stuff off. And I figured out how to both get the capacitors in the right place that did roll off the CB, but kept up the cartridge. So you could A/B the two, and I beat the other guys, including the Nakamichi. But then, so that was the route for once Henry left in '77. I left only a few months after. They were the people who came in after were from Silicon Valley. Their Silicon Valley method was to offer me double the salary with a 5-year non-compete. And I said, no, thank you. I'll leave, which completely shocked them. Pierre Lamond, he's still around in the industry. He's very old now. But, that completely blew their minds. But meanwhile, I should have said, AdNet had kind of put me up on a pedestal. They had taken out ads calling it the Holman circuit. They had taken me around to their dealer network, and I gave a little talk, and then Frank Reed would give a talk on how to run your business. So AdNet was very good about teaching its mom and pop retailers about how to do business. And we had this technical side, a little bit of me too. So I became well known.
And do you think that sort of was because that was Henry's sort of style? It was at his days earlier at KLH. I think he was sort of the face of the company and leading with a bit of the engineering is leading the company here, and so that's sort of what's sort of his method, and I think that's probably, I assume he was just saying, well, that seems natural. You developed this new technology, and it's a fantastic new technology. Let's put Tom out there to talk about it.
Right. Well, therefore, I became known to the dealers. Well,
right.
That wasn't a bad thing, because when I left with a partner who had been the chief video engineer, and I was chief audio engineer, chief electrical engineer, eventually he and I built the Apt Holman preamp in my apartment, about 4 blocks from WBUR, so lots of RFI. So had to build it bomb-proof, but working well. And spent about 6 or 7 months doing that. Then went to CES and we brought a Studer B67 tape recorder, Dolby A noise reduction, record company master tapes, this little preamp, then a big honker or somebody's power amp, I forget whose, Snell A3 loudspeakers, and audio pulse, time delay, and reverb. The system sounded wonderful. It was source tapes. We didn't even play phonograph records. We were from master tapes. And we set up in the Drake Hotel, and we had invited the dealers of the good ones of the Advent network. Well, that was it. It kind of made us, put us on the map, because there we were sounding wonderful. We weren't even playing phonograph records yet, but did a great demo and good people and so forth. So we started Apt, and of course we got noticed by the magazines, got into Stereo Review as a company of 2 people with a few people building these things. Got reviewed very early in High Fidelity and Stereo View, and a few others. And so I think we were on our road. I did that for about 3 years, 4 years, and we came
So,
up.
so on that note, before you move on from that initial preamp, what did you find? You had, I guess, I assume you were flooded with orders.
Well, no, I mean, we had to build it. We weren't exactly flooded, but we were, yeah, we did get up to the largest percentage anyone had in preamp sales.
Right.
Preamp was a huge market, very spread out, but no one had a concentration. Well, we got the concentration, and we went around, we did a ABC between, shall we say, an unnamed preamp, which was more expensive than ours and not very good, had a lot of RFI interaction stuff, and then a Levinson JC2. Well, John Curl had designed with all FETs. Well, it was all right. So we compared here equal and killed the other guy, and then we compared with something that was 4 times the price, and we sounded equal. No brainer. Right. The cheaper one's better.
So did you get to go find a partner to do the manufacturing, or you ramped all that up on your own?
We did, because we thought of doing it with partners in downtown Boston and so forth. They all wanted too much money compared to what we could do it for. And we hired all these Portuguese ladies from East Cambridge and some technicians that came from Advent and a big wave solder machine. And we did okay. We got up to 50 people. We got about a 30% market share in preamps. And was unheard of.
Right.
And then, and it has a number of features we can talk about maybe at another time. This is a long story to go through that. But it was feature filled, very audiophile, 2 tape machines. Who has 2 tape machines today? Don't need it. But it dealt with 2 tape machines. It dealt with interactions at both ends. It had, I'd go on forever about that. So we started making then a power amp, and we made it. I was a little high end in thinking about being able to drive every load, drive all the speakers on the market. My competitors cost half as much, but they couldn't drive everything, and they were good enough for most people. So its sales were decent, but not as good as the preamp was the real breakthrough. Our amp was like $700 instead of $400 in those dollars. So that was a bit of a anyway. So it did all right, but my partner and I came to loggerheads. So I figured I couldn't do much about that, and then I got a phone call. And the phone call was from a guy looking for an engineer at Lucasfilm.